You know that feeling when someone shows up for you just when you need it most? That's what Uber is all about. Not just a ride or dinner at your door. It's how Uber helps you show up for the moments that matter. Because showing up can turn a tough day around or make a good one even better. Whatever it is, big or small, Uber is on the way. So you can be on yours. Uber, on our way.
Right now, I promised I would bring on Judy Shelton. Judy is one of the top monetary economists in the country. She and I have been friends and colleagues for, I don't know, at least 20 years. I believe she should be the next Federal Reserve Board chairman. I was just talking about how Jerome Powell has to go either this May or next May because his term is done next May, but I'd like to see him go on even before that. But Judy is an expert on monetary policy. Tim, can you get the list of those books that that Judy has written? She's written multiple books. And so, Judy Shelton, thanks so much for joining. I don't know if you heard my little rant about Jerome Powell. I'm angry about that speech that he gave, Judy, on Wednesday. I thought it was overtly political and partisan. I don't think that's what the Fed chairman should be doing.
Steve, well, thanks so much for your comments. I really appreciate what you're saying. And yes, I was listening very closely. And I agree with you. I think it was completely inappropriate for Powell to offer these gratuitous comments, bad-mouthing President Trump's economic agenda. And I particularly didn't like the way he did it. I see it as a kind of a passive aggressiveness,
right? Because
he tried to couch it as if he were just giving economic comments, and yet it's a sneaky approach of saying, well, on the one hand, we don't know what the impact will be of these policies, and so we're going to wait and see and let them play out. But we did see the tariffs were much higher than we expected, and therefore we're going to have higher inflation and lower growth. So he gives you this sense of, well, I'm being objective, and then he fires off something he couldn't possibly know. And I juxtapose that response of Chairman Powell's to his earlier reluctance to be critical at all of the fiscal overspending under Biden, which clearly caused the inflation.
Right. He never brought that up. I mean, it was in the 4 years that Joe Biden was president. In fact, he accommodated all of that spending. And so, Judy, I mean, one of the things I'd like your thoughts on, because it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but one of the jobs of the Federal Reserve Chairman, especially during a time of turbulence in the market when investors are nervous and fidgety, is to try to calm people down, right? And instead, Jerome Powell gives this speech, which doesn't calm things down. It literally the Dow fell 1,000 points in a few hours after he gave that speech.
Well, I liked your analogy. I think he fanned the flames, which is along with calling fire in a crowded room. Our president is trying to transform the economy. He's trying to empower the private sector, and that's what he was elected to do. And a big part of that is addressing the trade imbalances. So he's in these rather delicate negotiations, say with the European Union, where they had retaliated against the tariffs that were initially proposed. And we have the European Central Bank that yesterday saying they're going to drop their target interest rate. They're down to 2.25%. And here we are sitting with our Fed at 4.4% in a wait and see mode. And from what I think Powell neglects to take into account is how currency shifts are such a critical part of the trade relationship. So he is really countermanding what our president is trying to do in establishing a fair trading order and trying to have a level playing field. But we don't have this level monetary playing field. So Powell is assisting these other major central banks in shifting the terms of trade to their advantage.
Yeah.
It's
like putting America last.
Putting America last. This is exactly what President Trump got so angry. People say maybe he was out of line when in August of 2019 when he finally said, I don't know who's a bigger enemy. Is it President Xi or Jerome Powell? But he was so frustrated because we were trying to go after China on tariffs, and there was Powell pulling the same thing and keeping the dollar at a high level through interest rate policy when China was deliberately manipulating their currency downward.
At Capella University, you can learn at your own pace with our FlexPath learning format. Take 1 or 2 courses at a time and complete as many as you can in a 12-week billing session. With FlexPath, you can even finish the bachelor's degree you started in 22 months for $20,000. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu. Fastest 25% of students. Cost varies by pace, transfer credits, and other factors. Fees apply.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/Spotify.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
So, Judy, if you were the chairman of the Fed Reserve Board, and you may well be chairman of the Federal Reserve Board sometime soon, because I know you're on the short list, but if you were today, right now, what would you be advising in terms of monetary policy? Should the Fed be lowering rates right now? Should they be raising them? I don't know what the correct policy would be, and what would be the determining factors, or do we stay put, or what do we do?
Well, I think the goal is to have market forces determine the cost of capital. So I think it's a mistake for the Fed to be deliberately pursuing a restrictive interest rate for the purpose of curtailing economic activity, because they try to control demand. It would be much better to try to increase supply. And that involves...
Hold on. When you say supply, you mean the supply of goods and services produced?
Yes, because they're really talking about demand for those goods and services needing to be in balance with the supply, because then you're not causing inflation. That's what you want to bring into balance. But the way to increase the supply is by granting the people who produce that supply, which is mostly small and medium-sized businesses, who would like to expand their productive capability, they need access to capital.
Yes.
What I see our Fed doing is having monetized all the overspending by Congress, and then they buy that debt. So first, that puts the fiscal transfers into people's pockets. That puts the pressure on prices. That's what causes the inflation. And then they do a 1-2 punch of further punishing people who are now having to deal with the inflation with high interest rates, because that's how the Fed corrals that money to keep it from entering the real economy. So I think that it would make sense to move away from restrictive interest rates and to grant more access to capital If I were Fed chair, I mean, I would quit their tool of paying banks interest on cash balances. The Fed gave banks $186 billion last year to keep money sitting in cash rather than making it available to private sector borrowers or even putting it into treasuries, which would at least have brought down those yields, and then that helps the real economy. And the real
is that because they were paying interest on those reserves? Is that?
Yes, they pay interest on $3.5 trillion that's sitting in cash accounts at the Fed. And it turns out that over 40% of those cash balances held at the Fed are put there by foreign banks. So that money that the Fed is paying to private banks, including foreign banks, would otherwise have gone back to Treasury. That would have increased revenues to the budget. That would plug a big hole in the imbalances that we're trying to bring closer to a balanced budget. Wow. And so I think that tool is terrible. The Fed, they should be trying to conduct monetary policy the way Paul Volcker did. And they should be shrinking their portfolio. Why are they sitting on $6.7 trillion of assets and having such a big footprint in credit markets? And so I think what this has forced is a discussion on what is the proper role of a central bank in a free market economy. And it should not be to manage the economy. It should not
it's like central planning, right?
It's central planning, and it's carried out in a way that's very reminiscent of the way the old Soviet ghost bank used to operate, where they take
By the way, I see that
is.
I'm just looking at your resume, Judy, because I couldn't. You've written so many books, I couldn't remember all of them. And I see that this was pretty prescient. In 1989, you wrote a book called "The Coming Soviet Crash." Good call on that one. And then, and your two, more. Well, you wrote a very famous book in the mid '90s called "Money Meltdown: Restoring Order to the Global Currency System." And then your most recent book, of course, is Good as Gold, which is a fantastic read about what the Fed should be doing. I wanted to ask you about my buddy and your buddy, Steve Forbes, who's, I think, just a brilliant man, has been really jawboning the Fed about this idea that he believes, and I wonder if you agree with this, that the Fed has almost a growth phobia, that they're against economic growth because they think economic growth is going to cause inflation. And that doesn't even make any sense to me, but they got 300 supposed geniuses who are economic PhDs over there with these equations and these computer models that tell us that more economic growth causes inflation. But that seems upside down to me.
I think that's a great way to characterize it. The phobia idea, it's as if the Fed thinks growth causes them problems.
Right.
And so their model is set up to say that there's this trade-off between inflation and growth and employment. And they end up suggesting, and their mindset is that people working in a productive way are causing inflation. And so that's why they try to kill demand. When they have high interest rates, it's so that the people who want to expand their productive capabilities, these small businesses in most cases, don't have the capital that would allow them to hire more workers. See, I trust those people to know that this is going to be worth it. I'm going to pay a guy, and he's going to produce more than he's going to cost me. And so the Fed looks at it instead as, well, economic activity in itself generates demand. And so if we cut that off, then somehow that's going to make our job easier. We can control inflation by really hurting the economy and having more people out of work. And all they're doing is really, the government's going to continue to pay those high rates. So they're just shifting the power to government expansion of their role, because then they can still do the deficit spending. That's causing the inflation. That's causing the Fed to keep up interest rates. So interest rates then become a huge cost, a fiscal expense, our largest. more than defense, and so they end up shifting control of the economy to the government, which all they'll do is just tack on the additional interest expense on debt to those future budget estimates.
So Judy, we've only got
an obstacle to small business for borrowing.
We've just got literally less than a minute left. I wanted to ask you one last question on the way out, and appreciate your taking time on this Saturday afternoon to join us and educate us. I've always believed in the idea of like a price rule, and I also believe the Fed should be like a perestroika. There should be an openness, and I don't understand why they have to operate in secret. What do you think?
Well, I would definitely be oriented toward a rule-based approach because, again, if you ask what is the proper role of a central bank in a free market economy, is it to have a small committee meet in secret 8 times a year
it's
and
ridiculous.
decide what should be the cost of capital? One reason I've been pushing for a gold-linked treasury bond is I think that should then become an instrument. It could start as an instrument for people at the Federal Open Market Committee, our Federal Reserve Monetary Policy Making Committee, because then they should see what is the yield on a dollar instrument that is ultimately payable at a fixed rate in terms of gold compared to if it's paid off at maturity in fiat money. I mean, do they have
Judy,
more faith in those guys or in something tangible?
Well, your idea of the gold-backed bond is getting a lot of attention inside and outside the White House. I think that's ingenious. That's Judy Shelton. Judy, thanks for joining this afternoon.